Only problem? I bought it from a fake seller.
James Dainard just walked over to my desk.
If you skip the first 3 steps, that's the easiest way to lose money.
Hey guys, it's James Dainard with Heat and Dainard Real Estate and ProjectRE. So today we're going to talk about whether it makes financial sense to add an additional unit to your next rental property. So currently we're on site of our triplex that we bought in the Eastlake neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. We're waiting on building permits to add an additional 4th unit, which is going to generate us over 25 grand in additional income. We're going to take you through this building and take you through every step that we took before making this decision. So before we jump in and go through our processes, let's talk about the math behind the deal. So we sourced this property on market from Heat and Dainard Real Estate. We paid $1.25 million for the purchase. We're anticipating to put $500,000 into the renovation plan, which includes the cost of adding that additional 4th unit. Once the property is fully stabilized and renovated, the value of the property will be $2.3 million, which is an upside of over $500,000 in equity. Once we obtain permanent financing, we're going to be able to refinance out our debt and only leave $150,000 in the property and cash flow over $1,600 a month in income. So if you can increase your cash flow by adding additional units into all of your investment properties, doesn't it make sense to do that on all of them? The actual answer is no. There's many things that you need to think about before opening that door to that renovation plan. So the most important thing that you can do prior to purchasing one of these properties is A, check the zoning. If you're looking at buying a potential investment property and adding an additional unit, you need to make sure that your local jurisdiction allows for you to add that additional unit. You can lose thousands and thousands of dollars by buying the wrong plan. So verify your plan and zoning before you make that purchase. So next, you want to make sure that it makes financial sense. You don't want to go through all the work and all the headache of adding an additional unit when you could have maybe just went and bought a 4 unit down the road instead of having to add an additional unit. Always take a look at the comparables, make sure that your scope of work and your budgeting is correct and that the math adds up. Don't go buy a property just to add a unit when you could have already went and bought one and done it for half as much work. Alright, so we're going to talk about now why we bought this property, because I typically hate buying properties like this. So when you're adding an additional unit to a building, it takes a tremendous amount of work and time. So not only are you having to spend a lot of mental energy and planning to get this property in stabilized condition, it also takes a ton of your capital out. And the time value of money says you don't want to tie your capital up for too long, because all of a sudden you'll just be losing return year after year. So why did we buy this one? So this was actually listed for $1.25 million on market. It came live. It was in a very good neighborhood with good upside for zoning. You can actually build 8 townhomes down the road. So it was attractive for that reason. But it was listed as a triplex at about $350 to $400 grand per door that needs studs down reno. That is not a buy in Seattle. We still came out to look at it because it's interesting in a prime location and there's not very many of them. We came out, looked, and then what we discovered was the basement had tall enough ceilings in the city of Seattle that we could add an additional unit. I do not typically try to add additional units because there's so many factors that will throw off your performance. And that always comes down to, are you spending too much dollars on your renovation to not get it back? So the things that you need to look for when adding an additional unit on your construction plan is, what's your current condition of the building? In the city of Seattle, if you have an existing triplex and you're adding a unit, but the 3 other units are in good shape, it's actually a little simpler permit process. You're adding the unit, you don't need to upgrade the whole rest of the building. Typically that cost is going to be more money because you have to tie into old plumbing lines and electrical. So the typical cost on that is 85 grand to add that unit. When you're taking a building down to studs, the costs go down because you're already replumbing and you're already rewiring the whole building. So because you're doing all that work, you can reduce your cost on your basement unit. So the cost to add it on this building would be $65,000. Except you have to watch out for those hidden costs. What are the hidden costs? The hidden costs are the $65,000 that you have to put into the building by adding a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit, Then there's what does the city require you to do? Each area is different, so you need to investigate your own city. In the city of Seattle, when you're taking a property down to studs and you're adding an additional unit, they jam you with additional fees and expenses. What are those expenses? Well, the first one is you have to hold the property for an additional 6 to 9 months for your permit. It takes that much longer. So you need to factor for that in your pro forma. On the specific property, it's costing us about an additional $20,000. So now I went from 65 to add the unit to an additional 20, so we're at 85. In addition to, because we're taking it all down the studs and adding a unit, they're making a seismic upgrade the whole building. That's where we're actually sheeting all the floors, we're stabilizing it, we're making sure it can get through any kind of earthquake. The cost of this is $35,000 for the whole building. Now, it's not for just the direct cost of the unit, but you need to account for that. So now we're at $65,000 plus 20 plus $35,000, which puts us at about $110,000 for the unit. In addition to, we know that the city of Seattle requires special inspections. That's another $4,000 plus architect fees, which can be another $6,000. So now our cost of thinking it would be $65,000 has ballooned into about $125,000 to $135,000. So why are we doing all this? Because the math still works at the end of the day. We had to pull comp analysis, figure out what 4 units are selling for. They were selling for about 2.2 to 2.3 million. We can buy this structure for 1.25 and put about 500,000 into it, so the math's still gonna end up working out. So let's take a look at the rest of the property, and I'm gonna walk you through of why we made this decision to take on this massive headache and what the financial upside is. As long as the upside's there, it's worth doing the plan. So after creating our construction plan, we know it's gonna cost us $135,000 to add that additional unit. In addition to, it's gonna eat up 2 years of our time and capital, so we need to make sure it's worth our while. So how do we make sure it's worth our while? Well, what we do is we pull market analysis on rents to figure out what that basement unit will rent for. We know it will rent for $2,200 a month, which is roughly gonna be $26,000 a year annually. When you divide the $135,000 to add in the unit by the rent income, that's a 19% cash on cash return, which is pretty good. For me, it's not worth the headache for the 19% cash on cash return. But what makes it better is knowing the exit value of the property. We know by adding this unit, it's gonna add an additional $300,000 in equity to the building. We're able to use that leverage and borrow 70% of the new appraised value, the BRRRR method. So this huge project and adding the additional unit is allowing us to leverage more once we're all stabilized on the property. By adding this unit, that increases the value by $300,000. The bank will lend us 70% of the new appraised value, which is gonna give us an additional $212,000 in capital back once we're all stabilized. Remember, the unit only cost us $135,000 to add. So not only are we gonna be recouped all of our building costs on that, but we're gonna get an additional $70,000 to $80,000 back to us, and we're gonna cash flow an additional $1,100 a month because the mortgage cost associated with the loan is only $1,100 and we can rent it for $2,200 a month. All right, so when we buy these old buildings or I walk into an old building, the first thing I'm gonna look for is indicators of what the city's gonna require me to do. What those indicators are typically gonna be your framing and your mechanicals, right? So right now we're lucky enough to see that the building's all the way down to studs. So things that I can see right away. The flooring is not plywood. New homes are built in plywood. It gives a little bit more stability. This is built on old car decking, right? This is not like, it's gonna get through. So we know that because the subfloors are kind of busted up and out, that if the building shakes, it's gonna move a little bit. So the city of Seattle or major cities, they wanna see these buildings retrofitted to where they can withstand an earthquake or any kind of major disaster. So if you're taking it off the drywall off the walls, you typically have to upgrade the seismic. The other thing I'm looking for is I'm looking at, okay, what's my surface? This is car decking, it should be plywood. This is also 2x4 framing at this point. To get this seismic upgrade, we have to bolt this all down, and then also we have to either upgrade this for insulation to a 2x6, or for framing, we gotta upgrade this to 2x6. That is a tremendous amount of lumber that we gotta put back into this house. Other things that I'm looking for is like with the sheeting. So like right here on an old building, This all had skip sheeting on top, right? Which is gonna also reduce the stability. So all these are signs that the city knows that this is an old building and that they wanna see that it's safe and that it can withstand any kind of earthquake. So when you're taking these properties down to studs, you wanna be aware of your building codes, aware of what your city's gonna require you, and then just kind of know what the guts are and plan accordingly from there. If we were buying a value add multi-deal, we already know we're taking it down to studs, and just based on the year built, we can tell whether it's gonna be retrofitted. If it's built in 1950s or newer, they have better framing, they've been tied down to the foundation better. When it's in the 20s and we know drywall's coming off, we know the city's gonna make us upgrade, so we gotta plan accordingly. All right, guys, for more construction tips, flip tips, and investing tips, follow me on Instagram, jdainflips. For our company website, it's heatanddainard.com. And check us out on our YouTube channel for free educational advice at ProjectRE. I look forward to seeing you guys next time, and we can get on to my next adventure and next project.